Want me to?
We're now
Wow.
recording. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Okay, so I want to take a moment and welcome you to the Proposal Development Workshop. This is number, well, I won't even guess, but this is a part of a series that Research Development offers across the course of 2 semesters from fall to spring. And my name is Faye Farmer, and it's my pleasure to welcome you and our panelists for this discussion today. Just as a gentle reminder, it is recorded, so please be cognizant of what you share and make it as productive and generative as you can. Today's topic is collaboration for beginners, and I'm very happy that we have the panel that we have today. All maybe not close friends, but friends nonetheless and colleagues at Arizona State University, and some I haven't met or worked with until today, but were recommended because of their collaborative strengths. So I want to make that very clear that these are master collaborators we're going to hear from, and they're going to give us some tips and tricks about beginning collaborations. And we're going to focus almost exclusively on research collaborations that result in co-authorship or grant proposals or even community-based participatory research, those kinds of models. So collaboration in research is really, I'm going to read this to you here, is that it is fundamental to the success of faculty, and the pursuit of federal sponsored awards via proposals and research activities is no different. Collaboration can often mean that you rely on existing relationships and you acquire new ones. But sometimes proposals have accelerated timelines that require almost like add people, mix, and get collaborations. And that may not be the most healthy or successful or even long-term advantaged way to go about creating collaborations. So collaborations can exist in among 2 people and and among groups of people, and there's an agreement, a consensual agreement to work together over a certain duration. So it could be short term and it can be long term. And there's benefits to both participants. But again, it's different from working in teams or working within a hierarchy, in that faculty and often academic researchers come together in this. Nobody's told them to come together or required it. It's really consensual. So with that, I would like very much to pass it over to the panelists who will introduce themselves. They've been provided a couple of prompts, but they are welcome to do whatever they want in terms of speaking. They might have different aspects of what they want to talk to you today about. They will have about 10 minutes each, and then at the end we'll wrap up with some questions and answers from you. If I will be monitoring the chat, so if you have questions, you're more than welcome to put them into the chat. And I think with that, we'll turn to our first panelist, who is Dr. Martinez.
Yes, good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here among such great colleagues and folks doing amazing work, and to be included in this. So I'll go ahead and start by introducing myself. I'm currently an assistant professor in Southwest Borderlands at Arizona State University at the Polytechnic campus, which is, as you probably know, located in Mesa in the East Valley. And so a lot of my work and projects have actually focused on collaborating and looking at the East Valley as forming collaborations, partnerships, and different opportunities. A little bit of more of myself. I'm a first-generation immigrant to the U.S., which has really impacted learning the power of storytelling and forming connections to place and community. I advocate for community-based history projects, or what we know as public history projects, and I'm currently engaged in many projects that seek to connect academic work with community development. And so just to give you a quick example of that, I'm working on a project called Querencia Chandler, which is looking at the Latinx history and contributions of Latinx residents in the city of Chandler, from basically its foundation in 1912 all the way to the present day, and looking across the different generations. I'm doing that through the methodology of oral history or storytelling. And we've gotten a few exhibits. Thank you, Christina, for putting some of the links as I'm seeing those come in. And actually, Christina has been a great collaborator and somebody that I've worked with on building some of the networks and partnerships that have gone into the project. So that's a little bit about myself. Faye, did you want me to jump into some of the questions right away?
That'd be great.
Okay, perfect. So one of the questions or prompts that I got asked was, are there any customs or implicit expectations for collaboration by discipline? And how do you discover and or address these if you are a novice? Hopefully I'm saying that right. I always get English to Spanish translations, not the greatest, but so I wanted to say to this question is to start off, you want to reevaluate the mission and vision of a project you're working on, right? It is a project. If the project is insularly focused on particularly your discipline, and it's using particular methods that's solely in your field, I'm asking that as a question, right? Like, is it usually just housed in one field, in one discipline? Typically, the answer will always most likely be no, right? It's usually we're looking at more interdisciplinary based projects, which means more than one discipline. And a big part of this is that when you start a project, one of the things that I like to do is asset building, right? Do asset mapping, what we know as asset mapping. What are the resources? What are the skill sets? What are the abilities? What are your networks that you have available to you? And when you start doing that asset mapping, you are able to see how you're connected to different ecosystems based on the project that you're trying to accomplish and accomplishing that mission and vision. Well, oftentimes, if it's just one person on one project, I don't like doing very much solo individual projects, because right away, the first thing that you realize is the gaps or the things that you don't have skill sets for or knowledge systems for. But you very quickly recognize that by collaborating and looking at other folks who do have that knowledge system, those disciplines, those fields, you're able to form collaborations where it actually strengthens the project and you're really able to fulfill the mission and vision of said particular projects. So one of the first thing I'll recommend is do an asset mapping for yourself, but also for the project that you're trying to build. Look at the mission and visions and look at how people could be incorporated in collaborative projects to accomplish the mission and vision of those goals of that project. Now, one of the things I wanted to say off the back is that true collaboration, in my opinion, is when you invite people to design a project together from the get-go. Because then if you're inviting them at a later project and say, hey, Christina, I just want you to do X, Y, and Z, for example, I don't really regard that as collaboration. I see that as more like consulting or, asking her for her expertise, which there's nothing wrong with that. But then when we're trying to really build collaborative projects, I always tell people, try to be inclusive and include folks at the design process, because that's where you stand to gain more, really opening that project in that field and working collaboratively than doing it at a later project when you've already submitted a proposal or a grant, for example. And then the other thing that I wanted to bring to our attention is that more and more projects are doing this in terms of customs or explicit expectations. Is think about, you when you're meeting with your partners, looking at what are going to be the roles, the responsibilities, the different actions that each collaborator is going to be able to take on the project. Addressing things like hierarchies, if there's any, right? Like there's usually a PI, co-PI, and other folks on projects, being able to understand how the workflow is going to go. If there's a level of hierarchy, is it horizontal? Is it vertical? How do you want to model the workflow? And then more organizations, nonprofits, and institutions are moving towards doing what we call as memorandums of understanding or assigned agreements, right? And oftentimes when you bring that up, it could be a little bit of a uncomfortable conversation to have. But we forget that when you submit a proposal for a grant, that in itself is an agreement, right? That it in itself is a contract for you and your collaborators. But sometimes those particular grants and proposals don't spell out how you necessarily, what's your style of work, right? What's the values that your organization or your project are going to employ, right? When I was talking about hierarchies, those are things that we need to keep in mind, because sometimes, when we're talking about equity, mentorship, and support, those things are not always highlighted necessarily in those type of grant contracts, but could be spelled out in things like when you're working with community members, for example, as academics, or faculty members working with community members. It's important to spell out those different responsibilities and benefits. and different actions. So those would be my takeaways on that particular question. I'll move in fairly quickly into the second question, which I think is a little bit more digestible, and maybe in the Q&A we'll also spark some comments as well. So the second question is, in your experience, what are some of the benefits of collaboration, and what ways are these benefits tangible or intangible? So I kind of broke this up into two ideas or two ways of thinking about this. The first one is, I always think of projects as producing immediate benefits or long-term benefits, right? So the immediate benefits, I really think about accomplishing the goals of a project or a grant, right? So for example, there's a detailed timeline, say a year, 2 years, 3 years, right? And that's clearly emphasized in a grant. When I think of long-term benefits or long-term goals, I also think of macro level, things that can be done through projects. And one of these things I think of like as long-term goals or big macro level accomplishments are things like social transformation, right? How do we impact social transformation? Again, it could be at a city level, at a community level, neighborhood level, at a regional level, so forth, right? But some of these things we oftentimes think in smaller timelines. And I'm saying that that's perfectly fine because that produces tangible, direct results, right? And again, sometimes those are spelled out in grants or partnerships that you establish with folks. For example, for the Querencia Chandler project, for the small grant that I got, which was a seed grant or a proof of concept grant, it was, I'm only going to interview 12 people, and so small scale, right? But the idea is that we were going to be able to show proof of concept. We did that, and then we jumped into a much larger grant that we were able to interview a larger population within the city of Chandler. And so those produce direct, tangible results of being able to say, not only did we interview X amount of participants, but then the goals or the results was that we're able to archive this history that shows longevity and contribution of the Latinx population to the city of Chandler that hasn't always been recognized. How that's producing tangible results. Now we're collaborating with city government. We're bringing people to different panels, to different committees, to different work that they're able to influence some of the change and transformation that's happening in the city of Chandler, for example. So those are some of the direct examples. But then, of course, the last kind of point that I'll make here is that oftentimes we tend to think of in small cycles, but also I think it's always good to go into this collaboration effort with thinking of like, okay, we're only looking to collaborate X amount of years. But oftentimes when you are working on a grant or a project, you realize that when you really do a deep dive in a project, that oftentimes the issue that you're trying to address is much more complex than you originally might have thought. And so the idea of extending that collaboration or even forming other collaborations to resolve some of the complex issues that you're trying to work is important. And so that leads us to long-term benefits and long-term goals. But the only way to do that is to be flexible. And I think that the projects that are much more successful when it comes to collaborations are when collaborators, but also institutions, organizations, and so forth, are flexible and resilient in the way that they're able to adapt to the needed changes to pivot accordingly to the needs of the projects. So have that in mind, is that you go in with a goal to produce tangible benefits and results, but that you need to be flexible and adaptable as needed to solve complex issues, and that will produce longer term benefits for your constituents that you're serving in your project. So hopefully that's helpful. I look forward to some of the Q&A response, but also listening to some of the dialogue generated by my colleagues here. Thank you.
That was amazing. Thank you so much. Christina, you want to take it away?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. I am Christina No. I serve as Executive Director of Social Embeddedness within the Office of University Affairs. And I'm such a big fan of so many people that are on this panel. Just like years of admiration, but also lately a lot of collaboration. In my role, I get the opportunity to spend time with faculty, staff, and students, just like listening to what they're working on and what they're most passionate about. And then I also get to do that with community partners. And I think that's really I'm so grateful that this role exists and I get this response, or one of many people who have this responsibility, because we have these awesome subject matter experts and practitioners who are doing day to day all of this really hard work, where maybe sometimes they don't have the opportunity or the time or the desire to kind of like uh, emerge from where they're working to find those connection points. And so that's what I get to help do. I get to run around and just like listen to like what people are working on and then see if there might be a way in which we could work together, where there's maybe just a little bit more extra work or maybe not even like additional extra work. It's really just doing the things together. And so I'll jump into the questions now that Faye handed to me. And so one of those, the first one is, in what ways have you served as a connector or a third-party broker between collaborators? And so I can give a couple of examples. First one, I guess most recent, was just like last weekend, was approached by a community collaborator that I've been working with for a couple of years. She's no longer in that role, but she got me connected to someone from Maricopa County Public Health, who oversees their WIC programs, so women, infant, and children. And we partnered with them to host a community resource fair at the ASU Chandler Innovation Center. On the 30th, we had over 2,000 people attend. We had 55 vendors, and we have 5 ASU units represented. And so although that hasn't led necessarily to like community participatory research yet, it's kind of setting those things in place to launch those potential collaborations. And so just thinking about like the ASU Speech and Hearing Clinic that hosted, they provided over 100 hearing screenings. Like they were able to refer these different families to additional providers. And that's, you know, experience for our graduate students who are going to go into these professions. We also had faculty who had never met each other or who maybe were new to the university come out. And they met each other and talked about ways in which they could work together, which is really exciting. And then just the fact that they were there, they were walking around the fair and they got to meet all of these potential collaborators where it doesn't feel as like maybe stuffy. It's more just like, oh, like, what do you do? Like, what do you provide for the community? Oh, like, I've never heard of you. Oh, you know, back and forth of just like, oh, this is what I study. This is why I'm interested, you know, opportunity. I think one of the faculty members even brought their own kid because they realized it was like a perfect experience for their own children. Um, so that's an example. If anyone is interested in doing that in the fall, we'll be doing one in October downtown at Emerson Elementary, which is in the Phoenix Elementary School District, which happens to be in my neighborhood. And I'm really excited about that one because it highlights what Raphael said about asset mapping and like mapping your own partnerships and personal and professional connections. So the principal happens to be a friend of mine. We happen to have both done Teach for America back in the day. We're part of this network. His wife is an ASU alum and former ASU Foundation employee. Like sometimes, not sometimes, I would encourage folks to kind of like zoom out and think about like, who are my personal connections? Who are my professional connections? And what opportunities might there be to do work together? And so we hopped on a call, the principal and I this morning, he called me because we had been texting yesterday about this upcoming opportunity. And then he just gave me a rundown of all of the different ways in which he's been working with ASU over the last 2 years, which felt really cool because I helped introduce and get them connected for this entire list. And he's continued these collaborations with folks. And it was just like really awesome because like I hadn't heard an update about that in like a very long time. But you know, he was name dropping all of these different people. And it was just like surprising, delightfully surprising that, you know, these faculty who said that they were going to stay committed regardless if that there was funding or not. And then this principal who's been at this school, you know, for 3 or 4 years, like it's finally an opportunity to kind of continue that momentum and accelerate additional connection points and opportunities. In my experience, what are some features that have made connections successful or less successful? I would say maybe more successful is just people who are raising their hands to collaborate. I'm not in the business of trying to convince people that they should work with each other because it's, you know, I don't want to use my time and resources to do that. There are so many people at ASU and so many partners outside of the university who are interested in collaboration. So I think it's just like that intrinsic desire maybe, or people who are already raising their hands. And I would say one way to convince people that collaboration is awesome too is like they'll eventually experience FOMO. Like, right? Because I threw those 2 articles that from ASU News about Raphael's work. Like, I don't know how many public/oral history faculty at ASU are getting these, especially as he approaches tenure or like consideration for tenure, like are like getting this type of like recognition in our ASU News, or like, I love to shout out Aaron on like social media and all different platforms. And so I guess working with people who are raising their hands to who want to work together, and then also maybe putting yourself as a relationship broker or someone in the middle into the shoes of the potential partners. Like, how might this be valuable to them beyond the work that's going to happen and like the impact of that work, but like for a faculty member, like how might this help them with their promotion and tenure? How might this, beyond service, because service is not community engagement, how might this help them get published? Or how might this help them, put together a manuscript? And for community partners, how does this not just become like additional work for them? Because they're not paid necessarily to collaborate. Like I don't meet a lot of people who have a similar role to me in community organizations. And so how do we figure out, or how do I, working with faculty or staff member at ASU, figure out how does this get woven into somebody's existing work stream already? And then also thinking about how can that community partner get recognition or additional exposure or payment or some type of compensation beyond just like, we're doing really good work together. And sometimes that's like something as small as like a letter from President Crow thanking them for collaboration. Of course, compensation is always going to be amazing, but also like notes to their leadership as well. So like emailing the CEO or their supervisor about how awesome this person has been to work with, and why this collaboration is so helpful and beneficial. Things that have made connections or projects maybe less successful. When I first started in this role, I thought I could just introduce people and then walk away and like they would just like get it. That's not how it works. Because just like when people don't have the time to like kind of emerge and meet each other and spend time together, they don't have maybe the time to schedule that meeting either. And so I have learned that if I want to propose or suggest folks work together, I'm not just going to do an email introduction. I'm going to set up the conversation in the meeting. I'm going to, help design what the meeting purpose is. I'm going to help design what that initial agenda looks like, and almost like serve as like a zipper until partners get to the point where they say that I'm the one that's like slowing them down. So if they're finally like, we don't need you in this conversation, we are moving forward, kind of like what I said about the work that's happening with Emerson, like I strive to get out of the way, and that these connections and these relationships do not belong to me. Like the goal is that our faculty, our staff, and our community partners have their own relationships, and that I was just kind of there to kind of get things set up. And then if there's like a need in the future, happy to always jump in, but I I don't think it's a good idea to be a gatekeeper or someone who owns all of these relationships forever. I think that answers those 2 questions.
Yeah, we
Yeah,
can move on to Jacob.
yeah.
Okay, thank you. I gotta find Jacob. Jacob, are you ready?
Yes, I am. So it's good class. Good morning, everybody. My name is Jacob Moore. I'm the Vice President and Special Advisor to President Crow on American Indian Affairs for ASU, a position I just moved into in July. Before that, I was the Associate Vice President of Tribal Relations in the Office of Government and Community Engagement, which is also in the President's office. And the way that President Crow, I've heard him describe the work that those of us work in the President's office do in terms of meeting with stakeholders, both internally and externally, is that we are your concierge and we're also your air traffic controllers. We have the benefit of being in the catbird seat in terms of looking across the institution and to the degree that we can understand, what's happening within each of the disciplines, each of the units, what's happening externally in terms of federal funding, research opportunities that are coming out of the federal agencies, and then sometimes being able to see those connections that you don't have, access to in terms of where you're at. But also, sometimes the potential for duplication, that there may be somebody else that's in that same space, and the opportunity to make that connection in terms of there may be something here, maybe there's not, but let's introduce you to this group because they're on a very similar track and there may be some opportunity to leverage that. I think from what I heard in the first two presentations and probably throughout this is building relationships is the bottom line, and kind of mutual respect in terms of particularly an early career, getting to know who are your mentors or who are those that you're most interested in working with. When I came to the job of a VP, I had never been a VP before, and I'll go a little bit more in terms of my introduction in terms of how I got here. But I, talked to one of the senior VPs and said, this is going to be different for me because I've never been in a major university. This is different from work that I've done in the past. And so I asked for a mentor and was given one that actually ended up elevating themselves into a higher position in the university. And it wasn't more than just a couple of meetings, but I think it really helped me get centered and to kind of get some sage advice in terms of how this place operates, but more importantly, how to navigate. And that was probably the first step in building a relationship with a senior leadership member. Now that when I see that individual, they appreciate that I've reached out to them early in my career, and it's helpful. So I don't want to overemphasize that, but it kind of speaks to how I got to the university. Basically, the academic side, the scholarly work is still new to me in that I got to the university through the scholarly side, through the back door, so to speak, and that my work has been primarily in government affairs, and beginning to understand, the trajectory of our young faculty, particularly our native faculty, in terms of going from postdoc to junior faculty and then working toward a tenure track, and and the work that it takes to do that. Because I'm not a PhD, I'm an executive MBA and a degree in finance, but working both in urban tribal communities and tribal governments, they're all about grants and contracts. Unfortunately or fortunately, it's that relationship between the federal government. So whether it's Head Start or irrigation or law enforcement, tribes run on federal grants, and it's never sufficient. And so those tribes that have the opportunity to generate additional revenue, obviously casinos being the easiest one, but again, only works in places where there's a real, a robust market. So some of these smaller tribes might break even and they're creating jobs, but they're not generating a lot of revenue. And they do run businesses as well to help supplement just providing general government services. So that's really kind of the world that I came from in terms of coming to the university. And my role in coming to the university was also to try and rebuild that relationship between ASU and tribes after the Havasupai lawsuit, which involved tissue samples or blood samples, actually, from a genetic researcher who then distributed that to others without consent and led to a major lawsuit. So ASU was the poster child of what not to do when it comes to research in tribal communities. That was about 20 years ago. And since then, I think the university's done a good job of kind of rebuilding trust, which again gets to the second question. So my first question is, provide a positive example of co-design collaboration based between the nations and ASU that's received funding. This one fits in line with what I just shared, is that funding for tribes is very similar in terms of going after funding opportunities. And so when I walked in the door, there was a draft agreement, an MOA between San Carlos Apache and ASU that did multiple things, but one of them was to help them start a tribal college. And they had some USDA funding to do a feasibility study to look at creating their own tribal college. And the chairman, Rambler, went to President Crow and Well, basically, President Crow said, "How can we help you?" And he said, "Well, we've got this grant to start a tribal college, and can you help us with it?" So both myself and Vice Provost Maria Hesse, who ran at one time Chandler Gilbert Community College, spent 2 years in helping them strategic planning, and through the strategic planning process, and now they're up and running. We've been operating for about 6 years now. And this last graduation, I think they had about 30 graduates. But that's really has flourished in terms of multiple relationships with them, particularly during the pandemic, but also they brought the money, to ASU to do some of that work through Department of Education. And since then, we were awarded $2.2 million this last year to continue some career services, career hub type work, with the 3 school districts that serve the San Carlos Apache tribe. So they're, in some ways these are more use inspired and perhaps less on the research track, but there's still opportunity in some of these to have research that occurs. In the case of San Carlos, again, we're doing solar, and there's certainly research involved in that. We're also helping their health corporation, which aligns with university's effort toward working toward a medical school. And so once some of this takes root, and we have an open invitation, San Carlos does, for President Crow to come out to visit. But the challenge for me is to try and wrangle all the work that we're doing there, and so that we can make it coherent, so that the trip is more beneficial in terms of President Crow's time, because there's at least 4, 5, 6 places that we would end up visiting in the process. So that's the first question. The second one is, give an example of how long it's taken to establish a partnership or a collaborative, relationship with tribal nation and representatives. And the question is, what do you think the reason is for that? And it's almost too easy to say, watch Killer of the Flower Moon to understand why our tribes are so reticent, to deal with any entity from outside of their communities, because they've been mistreated. There's a long history there that often doesn't get told in terms of how they ended up within reservation lands. And then we have researchers that, have a solution and are coming out and they're looking for a problem. Oftentimes they are the last ones notified, so there may be a LOI that's due next week. And all of a sudden it's like, oh wait, there's some extra points here if we get a tribe involved. And so can you get us a letter of support, from a tribe in the next 5 days? And typically my answer is no. You got to start that process early. So to the question itself, I think we did write a lot of proposals during the pandemic and got funded on some of them, not all of them. At that point, it was really, life and death situation in terms of trying to help communities. And a pattern started to develop. And again, this was a collaboration between sociology and College of Health Solutions and others that we had that kind of put our heads together in terms of trying to get some funding around health equity. And the pattern that showed up in our grant writing was that typically the process is, we'll build the plane where we're flying it. If we get this grant, then we'll jump in and start the scope of work, and we have a budget here. We tried to set some expectations with our potential funders that, before you can fly the plane, you have to build a runway. And building the runway within these communities is going to take time, and obviously there's a short fuse here, a short timeline. But understand that it's going to take probably 6 months to 9 months for us to really build the trust with the tribe. And they may be agreeable in the beginning, but we still have to go through their IRB, particularly if there's publication rights, intellectual property rights, who owns the data, and work through some of those details before we're going to gain, sufficient trust for us to be able to kind of jump into the work. So that's kind of the long and the short of it. And I think I've covered the questions, but I'll make sure I save some time for my colleagues. So thank you.
You're very generous. Thank you. Thank you so much. And then I believe Deidre, Dr. Pfeiffer.
You got it. Yeah, Deirdre Pfeiffer. Good try though, Faye. Thank you. Hi, everyone. Pleasure to be here today. And I'm learning so much. I'm already taking notes from all of you. I'm an associate professor in the School of Geographical Sciences and Urban Planning. I'm also a collaborator in basically all aspects of my work at ASU. So I'll just give you a few examples. Faye invited me to be here, I think, because of my research collaborations in particular. So right now, I am the principal investigator of a Department of Housing and Urban Development funded effort to start and sustain a housing research center in Arizona. So our center is called the Arizona Research Center for Housing Equity and Sustainability. We're funded for 3 years, and our focus is on improving housing conditions for Arizonans, but also people, for Hispanic and other underserved communities in particular. So, Raphael, maybe we should chat at some point on your excellent work in Chandler. But I also collaborate in my teaching and community engagement. So just wanted to give you some brief examples. So in teaching, I designed a multi-campus course that is collaboratively taught at 7 campuses across the US. And then in my community engagement, I've taken on substantial administrative leadership within my unit, but then also I'm very active in community collaborations outside of ASU. So I'm a member of several boards, and I also help to lead an elementary school garden. So why am I so collaborative? Well, I think many of our speakers already have hinted at this, but I'm collaborative because to me, it's directly connected to the purpose of life, which to me, the purpose of life is about forming communities, building communities, and sustaining communities. So life is connected to community, and collaboration is about that, about community. So with that, though, I'll go to the particular questions that Faye advised me to answer. So the first is, what are some ways that students, postdocs, and early career faculty can practice a collaborative approach? So my number one advice is just learn by doing. Get involved in collaborations now, and opportunities to collaborate are everywhere around you. So choose something to start this month if you're not already involved in a collaborative experience. So at ASU, what are things you can do? Obviously, if you're a student, you're taking classes, there are opportunities to collaborate with your instructors, with other students through group work in your classes. You can get involved in clubs that are on campus. Look for opportunities to participate in governance, both within your unit or college or more broadly, the university. So I found tremendous meaning in getting involved in collaborative efforts in my unit, and in particular, helping out with administration of particular programs within my unit. So, and that was just a great experience for me. The other thing is I'll say, look at your profession. What are opportunities to collaborate within your profession? Something easy. So a lot of our professions have annual conferences that are put on by one of our professional societies. Look for opportunities to organize sessions at these conferences or organize events at these conferences. So I've long played a role in organizing sessions related to some kind of theme that is probably connected to my research or teaching, but it provides this opportunity to get to know other people and practice collaborative decision-making and executing something that can have some impact and start a conversation. And then finally, get involved in your community. I love what I love about ASU is, again, social embeddedness, Christina, which ASU is not just about building our institution, but building connections with community and bringing the institution out more broadly into our surrounding communities. So like I mentioned, and if you have kids, get involved in your school community through your PTA, other kind of extracurricular activities. We all live in local communities, local governments. Get involved in committees and advisory boards. I've found board membership a really amazing kind of training ground, learning ground for kind of different ways of collaborative decision making and building collaborative communities. So the last thing I'll say just with that question is just, especially because I think the focus is on research collaboration here, try to learn about budgeting. This has just been such a tricky thing for me. I think a lot of us as faculty, we kind of get into these professor positions, and I'll be honest, I've never taken an accounting class. I was not a business major. I really, it's just amazing how they let us do these things without very much knowledge about budgeting. You don't have to be like me. So I think there are ways that you can learn. So, try to get involved in managing budgets. And again, you can do that through the collaborative activities that you get involved in at ASU, such as I had some experience in that, when I took on some administrative leave, it involved managing a degree program budget. So that was a little helpful. But if you want to get involved in like committees or, your school PTA, consider taking on a treasurer position. These tend to exist in boards and other kinds of groups. Even if you feel like you're not qualified, you will learn by doing if you take on that treasurer position. And then the other thing, be an active observer of budgeting processes. And so try and get involved in proposal writing. I mean, if you're a student, ask your supervisor, to kind of involve you when they're writing proposals, ask to be there when decisions about budgets are being, made or deliberated, because you're going to learn a lot from that. And there's just lots of inside lingo and kind of good practices that are out there that there's not that much knowledge on already. So I don't know, Faye, I'll just do a plug. I think ASU could use a little more training on budgets and budgeting. Maybe it's out there and I just haven't found it, but I would be a supporter of that and an attendee. But just turning to the second question, so how is proposal collaboration different than co-authoring, research, if any? And so I just wanted to talk about a few similarities, but also key differences between collaborating, doing research collaborations that involve proposal writing versus writing, academic kind of publications like journal articles or books. So key similarities: they both involve significant storytelling. So again, skills in storytelling are key here. Written storytelling, visual storytelling, sometimes oral storytelling. They both involve building arguments, and those arguments are targeted to particular audiences. And so, like particular publication venues or people who are going to be reviewing your work and giving feedback. They also both entail, as we've talked about, working with people. I think Raphael mentioned hierarchies, that are kind of involved in these collaborations. So both journal, publication writing and proposal writing, they're like these established hierarchies. Who's the first author? Who's the principal investigator versus all these other kind of acronyms that come in. And I'll say with that, this is a tricky part. There's a lot of potential for free writing. So kind of inequalities and how responsibilities are shared in those kinds of activities. And they're both high risk, high reward activities. So, large chance of a failure, little chance of, easy success, but, success comes with a lot. So just lastly, I'll talk about some of the differences. So key differences: the argument that you're making in academic, publication co-authoring is very different than in proposal writing. In academic publications, you're making an argument that you've advanced knowledge, and that knowledge is going to make an impact, right? In proposal writing, you're making the argument that you have the potential to advance knowledge and make an impact. And actually, the target for the proposal, that entity should invest in building that infrastructure to advance knowledge. So actually, the argument is about the infrastructure and building that. The time span is so different. Academic publishing, usually you're working with people for years. With proposal writing, you see a call, and within a couple months, you have to form that team and do that deliverable, that proposal. And then, as I talked about before, budgeting is heavily involved with proposal writing. It's not really as much involved with academic publishing, although there are some questions about journal fees and publication fees and things. Budgeting is just so tricky because, there are cultural differences in how we think about money and talk about money, and people, conflate money with their self-worth, and these conversations are so difficult. There's never enough money to do everything you want. So there are difficult decisions that come from that. And then finally, targeting to an audience. So again, both are stories you're targeting to an audience, but in academic publishing, I think of like the dartboard, you can kind of hit anywhere, like within a broad range with an academic journal article. It should fit the aims of the publication that you're trying to submit to. But with a proposal, you have to fit like in that little tiny bullseye area. You have to meet very strict criteria, and your proposal is likely going to be evaluated and funded or not based on the extent to which you're meeting this little set of strict criteria. So that's all for today. So I will pass that on and look forward to your questions.
Everybody's head should be spinning from the amount of information that's flowing, but Dr. Guest is going to take us in.
Yes, thank you so much. And so I'm going to try to go as quickly as possible because I do want some time for questions. As I was kind of looking at, as a way of introduction, I think I'm going to kind of give you an idea of some of the partnerships I have and it'll come back to the question that I'm answering. So I'm an assistant professor of aging within the Center for Innovation in Healthy and Resilient Aging. I'm also affiliate faculty in the design school, as well as, senior global future scientist, research fellow for the Osher Lifelong Learning Initiative, affiliate in the Institute for Social Science Research, and a couple of more. I also serve on the board of the American Public Health Association as the speaker of the governing council, the treasurer of the Appalachian Studies Association, the treasurer of the accreditation body for gerontology and higher education, chair and incoming chair of the Augie Association for Gerontology and Higher Education work group, and a couple of other things. And I say all that not to say I'm too busy, but yes, I am. But the question I was asked to ask, do you engage with it? Do you engage in people within the university differently than you do with people outside of the university? And that's such an apt question because I'm actually in DC right now at a convening for one of the roles I have at ASU, which is the chair of the Age Friendly University Global Network, which ASU co-founded and now is based at Arizona State University. And it's fascinating because one of the things that came up here consistently at this meeting, and so it's me, it's ARP, Trust for America's Health, Institute for Healthcare Improvement, which are the four leads of the age-friendly ecosystem, and a bunch of funders, a bunch of practitioners, about 40 people here. And the common theme was we want to do more with universities, but y'all move too slow, and there's too much bureaucracy, and there's too much paperwork, and who do we talk to? And even if we start doing it, how do we keep the engagement going? You're always wanting money. And so, in some ways, yes, I find it, engaging with people at ASU and kind of building those relationships, with people like Christina, Faye, and others, it is somewhat easier because we're all talking the same language. One of the things that we had to do at this meeting, we actually spent about 2 weeks coming up with basically encyclopedia of definitions and examples to get us all on the same page, because it may not sound like a lot, but there's very large differences between being age friendly and being age inclusive, and a multi-sector plan on aging versus an older adult American plan on aging versus a dementia plan on aging. And so even with us being in the same sector, it's difficult for us to kind of have these conversations and to think about things. And then once you add on the level of bureaucracy at a university, it becomes really confusing for community leads. And so it takes time. To Jacob's point, you can't go to a community organization, a group, 3 weeks before the deadline and say, hey, we want the support. You really have to build those relationships. One of the challenges in higher education, of course, is that I'm not judged on the relationships I build. That's not one of my, in my college, that's not a tenure expectation. And so it's managing the kind of expectations of what you're doing at the university as well with the community engagement aspect. Even within the university, my second question was is there a persona or characteristic of someone who's more likely to be engaged versus others, and I'll focus a little bit on the university and then go out, which is, I hate to say it, but I do find, there are some fields that are just more collaborative than others. And that's because the nature of the work we do. I love reaching out, I have a background in public health and social work. I love reaching out to people in those kind of fields. My research actually focuses on how we create the optimal environment for aging, so age-friendly, age-inclusive design. And, I don't see anyone on the call, but, reaching out to some people in architecture and engineering is very different than reaching out to people in sociology or psychology. There's different expectations for collaborations. In my field, it is not uncommon for a paper to have 10 or 12 authors. In other fields, it's not uncommon for there to be one author. And why do you have multiple authors on a publication? And so even within that university context, we have different expectations about what it means to be engaged. And even within, I think, kind of the partnership networks within, your field, you might have different expectations. My training was predominantly in public health schools. And in public health schools, when a new faculty comes on or a postdoc comes on, you're added to the grant, you're added to the publication. You kind of build up those relationships there. whereas other disciplines have much higher barriers or much higher expectations for publication engagement. You know, I have colleagues in chemistry and biology that I kind of laugh at because they'll publish these papers that are 30, authors long, but it's because of how they're viewing it. And so I think thinking about the disciplinary expectations is really critical when you think about engagement. What is your college expectations on the, tenure and requirement level? But then when we look out and really focus kind of on the outside and, organizations we're partnering with, and I'm so glad to be talking about this after kind of going through it for 3 days when we're all doing this strategic planning process, it is like identifying your value. One of the things that came up here was that we really want to engage and reach students in high school, but we don't have any high school or middle school representatives here. And it's like, oh, actually ASU has the ASU Prep Academy and we have ASU Local and we can do that. But those are things that people aren't aware of. And the last thing I would say is that, and I think it's kind of come up here, that when you reach out to community groups and you come saying that I'm ASU and I'm here to help, or I'm here to help, that can have very different reactions depending on where you are. I've been in places in community groups, mostly working with older adults, that I go in and I am told everything that ASU has done wrong to that community and how ASU has destroyed the beautiful park. I go into other groups and they're like, oh, we're so glad, ASU is engaging in this community. A consistency, though, is that, I'll never forget, and this was with a group of very well-educated individuals, retired doctors. I went in and we were talking about a joint project they wanted to do in their village, which is an aging community that people are opting to age in together in a neighborhood. And they were, they're wanting to do all these health measures and all these things like, they want to do CT scans and blood draws, and they really want to figure out like, what is it in this neighborhood helping us age? And I was like, that's great. That's going to cost money. To start off, we'll need 2 or 3 million, probably, all that good stuff. And they're like, what do you mean? Like ASU has a partnership with Mayo, and I just read you got a $120 million grant. And so people think or know that, universities have resources, which we do. We don't need to deny that. Like, despite our challenges, we do have resources. But where those resources are isn't always clear to community members. And so me coming in saying like, I would love to help you, but I need to cover my salary, doesn't really resonate with them. And I'm going to end there so we have some time for questions, because I do want to have a discussion.
And I know that we are a little bit short on time, but I do want to be respectful of the questions. So you can chat them and then we can ask follow-up questions as well. We can stay online for as long as you need to, or can. And with that, I think if Haley can stop the recording,